Guy Ritchie's the type of filmmaker who can make any movie entertaining, whether or not it's actually good. And that's kind of what he's been doing for the past decade or so. But luckily, spoiler alert, this one actually is good. Hey everyone, it's Nathan Orenstein with The No Show, here to talk about Guy Ritchie's The Gentleman. The Gentleman stars Matthew McConaughey, Charlie Hunnam, Henry Golding, Michelle Dockery, Jeremy Strong, Colin Farrell, and Hugh Grant, and is written by Guy Ritchie. I'd be lying if I said that talking about this movie was an easy thing to do. Similar to Guy Ritchie's two classic films, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, The Gentleman is not a simple film. Also, quick heads up, I will be referring to Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels as simply Lock for the rest of the review, just for the sake of brevity. Okay? Cool. The Gentleman is actually pretty similar to Lock and Snatch as a whole. It kind of feels like Guy Ritchie finally realized what made those two films so great, and he tried to make a similar film in a similar style. If you're unfamiliar with Guy Ritchie's first two films, let me fill you in real quick. They're both films centered around some sort of crime that involve a few different groups of people. And among these groups of people, there are a lot of moving parts, often at the same time, and it does get kind of hard to keep up with at times. These movies are really fast, really flashy, really violent, and really, really entertaining. Guy Ritchie made use of very quick cuts and loud music to really drive the intensity of these films, and it paid off in spades. But since then, Guy Ritchie has seemed to have lost his footing a little bit. His films still are generally entertaining, but they really lack the style and subsequently a lot of the appeal of Lock and Snatch. Sorry about that long tangent, but it feels essential to talk about Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch while talking about The Gentleman, since it really is a similar film and those two films are both so highly regarded for their time. It would be pretty useless to even attempt to talk about this plot in depth, so all I'll say is that Matthew McConaughey is the head of the biggest weed empire in England, and there are a lot of people who want to cut to the action. There are, once again, several groups involved, and the story kind of bounces between each of them. Sorry for the super lame synopsis, but I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want to potentially spoil anything either. I suppose I'll finish up the comparisons within the next minute or so. Overall, The Gentleman just feels like a much more mature movie than Lock and Snatch. The editing has been taken down more than a few notches, which I think was definitely a smart move considering how reminiscent of the late 90s and early 2000s style it was. The story also moves at a much more comfortable pace than its predecessors, and I'm not saying that it's better or worse for this, but it fits the film well, which is ultimately what matters. But yes, there is still that stylish violence and dark comedy that we've come to expect and to love from Guy Ritchie. The Gentleman is definitely a film in the same vein as Lock and Snatch, but Guy Ritchie changes up the formula enough to make it feel distinct and unique in its own way. Now we can finally talk about how The Gentleman stands on its own. First of all, this is a fantastic cast and they all do fantastic work here. Every character in this film feels really distinct and they all feel essential too. You really feel like you know each character by the end, and I think that the slower pace of the film really helps with this. And I know I said I was done with comparisons, but I think this is actually an improvement over Lock and Snatch, where the speed of those films was so fast that you didn't really get a sense of who each character was. The story here is also really engaging, and while yes, there are some times where it does get a bit complicated to follow, I don't think it's a deal breaker. And the story is a bit more serious with its maturity, as I mentioned earlier, but there's still some hilarious comedy and some awesome action here as well. As for the bad, I wasn't entirely sold on how this film was told. If you watch the trailer, you'll see that Hugh Grant's character is kind of narrating events to Charlie Hunnam's character, and this narration kind of bleeds into the actual scenes with the actual dialogue. And I'll admit, the first 30 minutes or so, I was not feeling this type of storytelling, but it did grow on me a bit as the film went on. I also wasn't super keen on the ending. I think the story itself wraps up fine, but in the last 15 minutes or so, it kind of felt like Guy Ritchie just threw everything at the screen, and it became really overwhelming really quickly and did not match the pace of the rest of the film. Don't get me wrong, it was still exciting, but it was incredibly jarring to say the least. Finally, as more of a nitpick, There are definitely some of the editing tricks that I talked about earlier. There are some of them here, though not entirely prevalent. They feel completely dated, though, and reminiscent of the early 2000s style, which just does not match the style of this film. And they really didn't have to be here at all. Overall, though, I think The Gentleman is a very strong return to form for Guy Ritchie. If you like the two films I mentioned like a billion times earlier in this review, then yeah, you will almost certainly like this movie too. And if you haven't seen those films, the most similar director I could think of is probably Quentin Tarantino. So if you like something like Pulp Fiction, you will most likely like this one too. By the way, sorry if this review was a bit all over the place, but as I said earlier, there's just something inherently difficult to describing a Guy Ritchie movie in this style. I don't know what it is, but I'm sorry. Anyways, I was bouncing back and forth on my score for this film, but I ended up giving it the benefit of the doubt, and I'm giving The Gentleman an 8 out of 10. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and if you liked the review, then feel free to like and subscribe. And if you've seen The Gentleman or any of Guy Ritchie's other movies, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. I'll be reviewing The Turning within the next few days, so click that bell to get notifications for whenever I post. I've been Nathan Orenstein with The No Show. See you next time.